It was supposed to be a normal afternoon. I was 9 years old, walking alone through the woods with my Game Boy and a backpack full of snacks. I'd done it 100 times before. But that day, something felt wrong. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. And that weird sensation crept over me, like someone was watching me, even though I couldn't see a soul. I looked up and, I swear, I saw a dark hooded figure peeking out from behind a tree. Then, it ducked back. That's when I knew something was out there. This is a story that's really been bothering me lately for absolutely no reason whatsoever. A few months back, I had this dream that brought back a memory I'd tried to suppress growing up, but recently, it's been weighing on my mind. Growing up, around 2005, on the edge of the suburbs, there was this large grove of trees and hills by some railroad tracks. It led to a big forest about half a mile from my house. When I was 9, me and my neighborhood friends would ride our bikes to the tracks and walk into the forest to explore all the random pieces of furniture and junk scattered around. It was this peculiar, mysterious place. We'd play card games, do homework, hang out, just kill time until our parents got home. We never stayed too long. Now, there were a few small abandoned houses deep in the woods. We always kept our distance from them. One of my friends, Michael, swore a homeless man lived in one of them, and he gave us a simple rule. If you see him, run. So right off the bat, going near those houses felt like something out of a horror movie. One chilly November afternoon after school, I came home, dropped off my backpack, and headed for the woods. My bike was broken, so I walked. Michael had told me earlier that day to meet him in our usual spot in the forest to play Pokemon. Totally normal for us. We'd do it all the time, just pass the hours till our parents came home around 4 p.m. As I crossed the railroad tracks into the forest, I immediately got that weird feeling, like someone was watching me. You know that sensation? The kind that sends a chill down your spine? I looked around, nothing. Just me, the trees, the overcast sky making everything look extra eerie. Crunching through the autumn leaves, I finally reached the big clearing where I was supposed to meet Michael. Near where we always sat was his notebook. Open. Scrawled on the page was, "Hey, I had to go back home and grab some batteries for my Game Boy. Wait for me here. I'll be back soon. Michael." So, I waited. But I was alone and that feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Still, I brushed it off, told myself I was just being a wuss and sat down to play my Game Boy. But every few seconds, I'd snap my head up, convinced someone was there. I checked my watch. 30 minutes had passed. It was starting to get dark. Then, I heard leaves crunch. I looked up and I swear I saw a dark, hooded figure peeking out from behind a tree. Then it ducked back. My skin crawled. I jumped to my feet, frozen. I shouted, "Hello?" Then the figure peeked out again. A tall, dirty-looking man in a hood. And he called out, "Hey, buddy." I panicked. I grabbed Michael's notebook and I ran as fast as I could. I didn't even have time to look back. But I could hear him chasing me, the leaves crunching behind me. He was yelling, "Come back! I just wanted to talk to you. I'm sorry." I started crying. I genuinely thought, this is how those missing kids disappear. I kept running until I tripped over the railroad tracks and slammed onto the ground, cutting my knees. Just then, Michael showed up. He saw me, dirty, bloody, sobbing, and I screamed, "Run!" No hesitation, we both took off, ran all the way home. When we finally stopped, the man was nowhere to be seen. The last I saw, he was just standing in the woods, watching us, almost like he was defeated, like he couldn't believe he didn't catch me. I told Michael everything, and we never went back. Years later, in 2016, they bulldozed the woods and built a neighborhood there. We later found out from other friends who grew up nearby, the same thing happened to them. To this day, it remains one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. I'd like to begin by describing myself because I believe it's relevant to the story. I'm 25, male, a bit above average height, and I've been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week ever since high school. Gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, basically any team sport my friends are into at any given time. My favorite hobbies? Mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I just purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots. It was late summer and they were on sale, meant for next year's alpine climbs. I live in a European capital surrounded by incredible nature, full of trails and hiking routes. So I decided to break them in last Saturday. That day also happened to be my grandfather's birthday. He loved hiking too. Before he passed, these boots were overkill for the local woods, but I needed to try them out. I planned a 25-kilometer hike and set off around 9 a.m. It had rained the day before, so I expected muddy paths and fewer people, since most get scared off by bad weather. After a blazing hot summer, the cool air was a welcome relief, especially beneath the trees. A dog would have joined me in the past, but she's 14 now and doesn't care for long walks. My girlfriend had last-minute work, so from the moment I woke up, I knew I'd be doing the hike alone. The first half of the hike was perfect. Minimal altitude change. I barely broke a sweat. I misjudged the weather's effect though. There were more people out than I expected. Still, I only passed maybe 6 or 7 others in the 2 to 3 hours, mostly cross-country runners. I took my time, stopped often to take pictures, examine animal tracks. Deer and wild boars live in these woods. Nothing more dangerous. Not animals anyway. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Around noon, the trail met a paved forest road. You could drive on it, but only led to a few landmarks deep in the woods, so very few cars ever use it. As I was walking along that road, I heard a vehicle behind me. An older green SUV passed by. Nothing strange. Fresh plates, maybe an import. I didn't think much of it until it came back. This time it passed slowly. I got a clear look at the 2 men in front, both wearing baseball caps and sunglasses, beards too. I assumed they were gamekeepers, but their vehicle had no crest, no insignias. I hike often. I see gamekeeper vehicles. They always have markings, usually on the hood and doors. Also, they don't drive SUVs like that. They use Jeeps. Still, I didn't feel any discomfort, yet. My trail soon veered back into the woods. I walked on, admiring the trees, lost in thought, until I felt something. That strange sensation you get when you're being watched. Then I heard it. An engine. The trail was narrow but technically drivable. I turned around and there it was. The same SUV, just an arm's length away from me. It had stopped the moment I turned. The driver was staring. I couldn't see his eyes, sunglasses. I politely asked, "What's wrong? Shall I let you go?" He didn't answer, just stared, then slowly reversed, disappearing behind a bend in the trail. That's when the unease set in. He was alone. Earlier there were 2 men. I stood still, listening. The SUV stopped just behind the bend. I heard the engine cut off. The door opened, then closed. Nothing. I turned and began walking, faster than before. I was no longer just hiking, I was leaving. After a while, my nerves calmed a bit. I'd been drinking a lot of water, so I figured I'd take a break. I spotted a narrow side path that led to a hunting tower. A simple wooden structure, a couple meters tall, where hunters wait for game. I walked to it, set my bag down by the ladder, and relieved myself. No signal, so I checked my physical map, took a sip of water, and caught my breath. I must have been there a few minutes. Then, I headed back to the main trail. Just before stepping back on the path, I noticed it. Dead silence. No wind, no animals, no forest sounds at all. And then I saw him. Maybe 50 meters ahead, standing on the trail in the direction I was headed. A man, dressed in tactical clothing, baseball hat, holding a rifle with a scope. I froze. He was completely still. I believe he hadn't expected anyone to come from where I had. Had it not been for the SUV incident, I might have assumed he was a hunter. But it was summer. Hunting is illegal in these woods this time of year. And the second man from the SUV had been missing. In that instant, something in me snapped. I made a choice instinctively. I was going to sprint deep into the woods past the tower off trail. If he meant nothing by it, he'd just think I was a lunatic. If he didn't, then it was the best decision I've ever made. Because he started running toward me. Adrenaline exploded inside me. I sprinted, branches cutting into my legs, slipping, crashing through brush. I was in shorts and a thermal jumper, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until I was out of breath. Several kilometers. I passed smaller trails but never slowed down. I kept checking my phone for signal. Nothing. Eventually, when a faint signal returned, I messaged several friends, panicking. Most didn't take it seriously. You're overreacting. You probably misunderstood the situation. Maybe. Maybe not. Eventually, I hit a trail that led into a small town at the forest's edge. It felt like I'd been running for hours. Once I reached the main square, I changed. Took off my jumper, stuffed it in my bag. At least I looked a bit different now. I waited for a bus, watched every passing car like a hawk. The bus dropped me near where my car was parked. I got in, drove home, shaken. My dog greeted me like I'd returned from a war zone. Dogs know. She knew something had rattled me. I spent the rest of the day in the bathtub just thinking. The boots? They destroyed my feet, but they're not made for sprinting. I called the forest's gamekeeper office. They don't use SUVs like that. No green imports. Their keepers almost always work alone, not in pairs. They took me a lot more seriously than my friends, but they warned me the police wouldn't. No hunting is allowed in that forest during summer. I've been watching the news. Nothing unusual has come up, and honestly, I hope it stays that way. To the gentleman in the forest at lunchtime, let's never meet again. Hey, quick pause. If you've got a true creepy story of your own, I'd love to hear it. You can leave it in the comments or send me an email at MrLiminalStories@gmail.com. I read every single one, and who knows, it might end up featured in the next video. It was a Sunday, early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm I love visiting, mainly because that's where I get to see my dog, Molly. She's a mutt, not a small one either. Big enough to make me feel safe when we're alone together, especially out in nature. That morning started like any other. Me and my dad got in the car, drove around for a while, and eventually arrived at the farm. The second we parked, I jumped out and hugged Molly. My parents always got annoyed when I did that, since I'd end up smelling like dog for the rest of the day. But I didn't care. I clipped on her leash and asked my dad if I could take her for a walk. He always assumed we'd just head down the dirt road and back, but I had other plans. I always took her to the nearby forest. That forest was my place. It gave me this unmatched feeling of peace. Quiet, calm, total escape. Once we got there, I unclipped her leash so she could explore on her own. I passed the time carving my name into trees or looking around for interesting rocks or tracks. That day, I'd found an old table leg and was using it like a baseball bat, just hitting rocks around. That's when I heard it. Molly was barking, and not her usual "there's a squirrel" kind of bark. This was intense, sharp, alert. I froze. This wasn't normal. She never barked like this in the forest. I immediately grabbed the wooden leg like a weapon. I knew I wouldn't actually attack anything with it, but holding it made me feel a little safer. "Molly!" I called out. "Molly, come here!" But she didn't come, which was strange. She always came when I called. I followed the sound of her barking, trying to stay calm, and then I saw it. A man, probably in his late 50s, half naked, holding a large machete in one hand and a bottle of what I assume was moonshine in the other. This was the first time I'd ever come across someone in the forest. Definitely not like this. Molly was barking at him, but he was completely ignoring her. He was hacking away at the ground with a machete for no clear reason. I had no idea how to handle this. Honestly, even now, I don't know how I would have handled it better. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked. I didn't understand how serious the situation was in the moment. I was just a kid, confused. He turned to face me, and I'll never forget those eyes. Bright, icy blue, wide open, too wide. Then he said, "Come here, boy. Look what I've dug up." I was terrified that if I didn't listen, he'd chase me. That was the last thing I wanted. So I stepped a bit closer, but kept my distance. There was nothing in the hole. Just dirt. Emptiness. He turned back around and kept hacking away at the ground, taking sips from his bottle like nothing was wrong. I knew this was my chance. I slowly crept over to Molly, grabbed her collar, and began walking away. Quietly. Carefully, trying not to make a sound. But just before I turned the last corner, I looked back, and I regret looking back. His head was buried in the hole, like he was sniffing it or listening. I don't know. But I watched, and after a second, he stood up, and he had a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what it was. I couldn't tell if it belonged to an animal or something else. That was enough. I sprinted. Molly ran with me, and as we tore through the forest, I could hear him laughing behind us. Then something flew past me, in the corner of my eye. The machete. He threw it, and I heard him yell, "Damn it!" It only made me run faster. I know the forest like the back of my hand, so I wasn't worried about getting lost. I crashed through branches, ducked under brush until I finally saw the clearing and the garage where my dad was testing the lights on our tractor. I didn't say a word. Not one. I was scared that if I told him, he'd be mad and never let me walk Molly again. So I kept it to myself. But I never went back to that forest alone again. Man with a machete and a bone in your mouth? Let's not meet again. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen, building shelters, making traps, practicing fire starting with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to high school, we had this idea to pull a Stand By Me. It was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp just off the tracks. Of course, we knew it was dangerous and that we were likely trespassing, but we were kids. And we had a lot of fun. We found beautiful rivers, discovered bridges no one went to, fished, hid from trains. At night, we'd camp in the woods just near the tracks and make small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but we always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out. We were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family during the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, Joe and I got to talking about our Stand By Me trips, and, well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came and we started out early in the morning. My wife dropped us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave a what the heck and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We didn't have fishing gear this time, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had small hammocks to sleep in, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw it. An old building down at the bottom, maybe 100 yards further into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something because there didn't appear to be a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. It was completely quiet. No movement, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. The cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered and black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no road. Just a forgotten church sitting in the woods. We left immediately and went back up the hill to the spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would bring. Besides, it was dusk and we figured we'd just rig up our hammocks, get some rest, and move on early the next day. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks shooting the breeze, we began to hear something coming from the direction of the church. Our conversation went something like, "Do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing." And yeah, it sounded like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two. The singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Eventually, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from our old days. It was second nature. The moon was barely out, but it gave enough light that you wouldn't walk right into a tree. Still, it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw a light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I leaned in close, whispering, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked like candlelight, flickering, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to make out who was inside. We only saw the occasional shadow. We had no intention of getting closer. We were about a football field away, and that was just fine. The singing continued for a while, then it stopped. And that's when we heard a booming male voice start to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice had thoroughly scared the crap out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher from a movie. But again, it wasn't English. We couldn't understand a word. Eventually, it became a back and forth. The male voice would chant something and a group would respond in song. Then they all broke into this long, sustained wail. It just kept getting louder and louder until it was so intense, so disturbing I covered my ears. And then just like that, it stopped. I was about to whisper, "Let's get the hell out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." Sure enough, a line of figures walked out of the church, all holding hands in single file. Some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the lights began to move toward us. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our gear, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill, moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued moving as fast as we could, running in bursts, walking fast in between. Eventually, we stopped seeing the lights. Finally, we came to a road. According to the map, a small town was about 15 minutes down it. We walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. She and some friends just laughed and said it was probably kids messing around. But I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. I don't know who those people were, but that night, that was the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me in the woods. This might be a ramble of thought, but after recently stumbling onto this sub, I finally felt like I found a place where I could share something my family and I experienced a few years ago that, to this day, still gives me a shiver. I've been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon. I've always felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. But a few years ago, something happened. It was just me, my wife, our daughter, and our 2 German shepherds camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I've included the coordinates of the site before, but all you really need to know is it was perfect. Not an established campsite, just a natural horseshoe off of USFS Road. Flat ground, full trees, and a good fire pit. Private enough that our dogs, who can be loud and a bit intimidating, wouldn't bother anyone. The first night, my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a 2-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away. We let our male German shepherd Guts sleep with her. He's fearless, and honestly, I felt confident nothing would get to her with him inside that tent. But that night, my wife and I couldn't sleep. We kept hearing footsteps, and they were heavy. Not like the typical critters you hear rustling through brush at night. I was already on edge, especially after reading about that tragic story. The dad in California whose life was ended in a tent, just feet away from his 2 infant daughters. That story stuck with me. So yeah, I came prepared. 2 pistols and a rifle. I'm not one to take chances. But even with the dogs, and Guts in particular, nothing could shake the bad vibes that night. Those footsteps, they weren't from deer. Maybe elk, but definitely not raccoons or squirrels. Day 2, morning. We went for a walk down the road about 300 feet out. We came across a clearing. There was an abandoned road behind a rusted gatepost. No gate, just thick vegetation. Something blue caught my eye, and suddenly Guts took off running down the abandoned road. My heart dropped. I thought, great. Another family's camping down there and he's about to scare them to death, or worse, get himself shot. So I ran after him, fast. He only made it 20 feet in before stopping when I yelled his name, but I'd already covered just enough distance to see it clearly. There was no one there and something was off. I called out, "Hello? Sorry about the dog," but got no response. Still, my curiosity got the best of me. I walked in to check out the site, and what I saw, I'll never forget. It looked like a normal campsite. Cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, a folding table. But everything was destroyed. Not just knocked over, ripped, smashed, torn, and in some places shredded like it had been clawed. An expensive REI tent, flattened. The cooler and propane tank, crushed. We walked around the circle of debris, all of us confused. Why would anyone leave all of this behind? I tried to explain it away. Maybe they left in a hurry and animals got to it later? But the area was covered by trees, so snowpack wasn't a factor, and some of the damage, like that flattened cooler, just didn't make sense. That afternoon, me and my daughter were playing bocce ball back at the campsite. My wife walked about 70 feet north to take care of some business. I didn't have line of sight on her. Suddenly, Guts bolted straight in her direction. That got my attention. Normally, he wouldn't leave me unless he was called, but she hadn't said a word. His speed, his focus was like nothing I'd seen. Something was wrong. I took off running after him. My wife met me halfway, jogging fast, looking spooked. I immediately drew my pistol. Guts kept running another 100 feet into the woods before I called him back. Our other dog, Leia, who's the pack leader, the trail boss, the one who always charges ahead, refused to move. She stayed glued to our daughter's side, her fur standing on end. That had never happened before. I asked my wife what happened, and she said, "I was trying to pee, and suddenly I felt every hair on my body stand up. I knew someone was watching me. Then I saw Guts sprinting toward me, and I just got up and moved." We spent 10 minutes checking the area. No trails, no broken branches, no signs of anything. We made the call to stay one more night. It was too late to pack up and drive. This time, all of us would sleep in the big tent together. Before bed, I rigged up a perimeter alarm. Real simple, just a rope, a mint can with coins and keys, zip-tied together. If anything hit it, we'd hear it jingle. While tying off the last corner, I found something that made my stomach drop. Another old rope, tied about the same height, 8 to 10 inches off the ground. Nearly rotted though, brown and brittle, but it had rusted washers tied to it, just like mine. Someone else had done the exact same thing at the exact same tree maybe 10 or 15 years ago. At that point, my paranoia was off the charts. I had to protect my family. When evening came, I had them sit in the truck and I fired a clip from my .45 into the dirt. I wanted whatever was out there to hear it and know we're armed, we have 2 wolves, we're not easy prey. That night, silence. No footsteps, no alerts, no barking. We packed up and left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, I watched the Amazon documentary Missing 411, The Hunted, and I noticed one of the case clusters is right near where we camped that weekend. A wave of dread hit me. I thought about that destroyed campsite we found, about what might have happened there, and how close, less than 300 feet, we had been to it. We've camped since then, and we still love the beauty of the Northwest. But that place, that weekend, there was something out there. And we're just thankful Guts was doing what he does best that day, because I really believe he saved us.